you for being here, and thank you to the TM Forum organizers for hosting us. Delighted to be here with my peer,
Likewise.
Mykola. I'm going to talk a little bit about how what's been our journey in unlocking a better customer experience and network experience through AI. It's our experience, it's our journey. It worked for us. It may or may not work for you, depending on the type of the organization that you are. And then Mykola is going to take it in what are the latest trends and where we're going in the future. So how do you unlock value from AI? If you look at our journey, we thought about this kind of like 3 main points. One is you got to think big, think tech 10x. So don't just kind of incremental, but how do you deliver step function improvement? Set that big goal, set that North Star. For us, our North Star was creating a digital twin of connecting the end-to-end ecosystem of our operational data so we can make better decisions on how to drive a better network experience, better resiliency, better customer experience, right? Because if you think about what we do in the telco space, is network is core, and then the second is delighting customers with that network. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to give a few examples on how we use these capabilities that we build in network to drive better resiliency in the network how do we proactively make sure that the network is more resilient? And as you know, like nothing is 100% proof. Especially when you're dealing with a booming economy, construction, there's always something's going to happen. A fiber gets cut. How do you proactively respond then to those events? And then in the end, I'll also give an example on how it's not just about building new capabilities, but how do you use this technology to modernize and make your existing infrastructure of apps, platforms, and systems more intelligent as well. The second thing, is where do you start? If you want to make a change, if you ever have dealt with Six Sigma, quality improvement initiatives, and so forth, if you want to expand it across the enterprise, you find the core. What is your core of your enterprise? You build the processes there, you deploy there, and then you can reach the edge of the enterprise. For us, is the network, because that's what we do. That's our competitive advantage. So we started with building these capabilities in network, and from there, we've kind of expanded it to field operations, care, marketing, and other areas of the business. And then focus on business outcomes and don't chase technologies. Technologies are important. You want to invest in the latest and greatest technologies and so forth. But when it comes to delivering value, it needs to be a business-driven initiative. It cannot just be an IT initiative to where you're deploying technology for the sake of deploying technology. You got to deploy the technology and make sure that it delivers value, not just for your internal operations and investors, but also for your customers. A few weeks back, how many are familiar with Shark Tank and Mr. Wonderful, right? Mr. Wonderful made a comment that investments in this space, in the AI and Gen AI space, are slowing down. Well, they're slowing down because investors are not figuring out a way how to make money because it's deploying technology. There's awesome things that are happening with LLMs. It can answer things. It can make PowerPoints for you. It can write papers and so forth. But when it comes to the enterprise operations, the LLMs are not good at kind of reading the language of the enterprise. Our approach, as far as setting the infrastructure, we chose to go with a hybrid approach. And our hybrid approach was, and Mark Austin, our VP of Data Science, has talked about this in other sessions in more detail. But our approach was marry what's best in class in the market space in terms of SaaS platforms with our internal IP. AT&T has had a long history of AI since the very beginning, but we found the sweet spot of marrying what's in the marketplace, the leading platform, with then our lifelong innovation. And we've taken this at scale. This is not just a concept. We've been doing this for the last 5 years. The main thing that is data integration is key. Data integration and cleansing is key. You have to start with that because it's the core of what's going to drive everything. We wanted to make sure for this to work, as I mentioned earlier, it cannot just be an IT initiative or a technology initiative. To reach scale, we found that we needed that the tribal knowledge of the people doing the work. We think about it as those that are like 1 degree separation from the customer and operations and problems. We engage them into this self-service platform that we stitched inside of AT&T to deliver this capabilities. And then use cases. Like I said, you have to pick use cases that will deliver value, actual value for your enterprise and for your operations. And build these cases, build the kind of consensus around these quick cases with your partners, finance, security, privacy. We like to think when comes about security and privacy, we think about security and privacy by design. We think about that upfront before we build the use cases and before we start coding, and not in the back end. And if you do it that way, I think that becomes a competitive advantage for you as well. Digital, this enterprise, we call this, as I mentioned, our digital twin. Well, what does our digital twin means? Most people, when they talk about digital twin, is merely a copy of their data, one-way copy of the data for analysis and so forth. Our concept of the digital twin is marrying data with the logic of the enterprise, that knowledge of the users across the enterprise, with actions. So the digital twin that we built was more than just data for reporting and analytics. We had this vision of how do we get the data in one place, connected end to end. We call it ontology, and this ontology is more than just metadata, is building that logic of the enterprise on top of the data, but then within the same platform, create the capabilities that then you can take actions with that logic and the data to connect teams, objects, systems with each other and drive that intelligence end to end. So how have we used this in the enterprise? Call before you dig is one example. We started this initiative about 5 years ago. And this is, you want to plant a tree on your yard, right? You want to do landscaping, you're remodeling. Construction companies, they do this. Each time a construction project happens, you have to call to mark the facilities. And this used to drive significant costs for us, rolling truck rolls to go mark the facilities. Sometimes people in the field would not get it right because of that system disconnect. So what we did, we started, like I said, at the core. We started the core of operations, our network. We mapped our topology of all of our assets, fiber lines, copper lines. And then we married this with other external data, street view maps and so forth. And we used AI to analyze how we kind of perceived the network was set up, plus with reality in the field, plus history and so forth. And not only did it reduce our operational costs to where we could make decisions based on data that if somebody was kind of trenching across the street, but we could tell from the street view that our facilities were aerial, well, there was no need to send somebody to mark the facilities, right? So it reduced that cost as well. But in the cases where there were buried facilities, we had that accuracy within a few kind of feet to tell where our facilities were, improve the customer experience because we were able to reduce the errors that would happen otherwise in the field and would disrupt the experience of our customers. I said that you cannot prevent 100% of the cuts and the issues. In this kind of business, it's not a matter of if, but when something is going to happen that you have to respond, whether it's weather or whether somebody cuts, trenches across the street, unauthorized, makes the mistakes and so forth. But how do you respond to that? So our approach was, again, use AI, use Gen AI, take millions of alarms and tickets, being able to correlate them together through AI and improve our time of correlation and being able to instead of sending multiple texts, trying to identify where the problem was, with a very, very high level of accuracy that continuously get better, be able to send the right text the first time to respond to customer issues. From an operational perspective, this is another use case. As we continue to evolve our network, in the telco space, there's still the copper legacy network that you have to modernize, that you have to groom and so forth, so that then you can use those investments to invest in 5G, invest in additional fiber. This is another case where through AI and Gen AI, all the legacy records of where we have transport access to not just individual customers, but connecting facilities together, providing service to business customers, being able to see where we had opportunities to consolidate and groom things to reduce the costs down, so then we can drive. So think of this as in the old Windows machines where we had defrag, you had to defrag your Windows and consolidate your files to improve the performance. Same, we think of this as our defrag of facilities, to where we find facilities with low utilization, combine them together to drive our unit costs down. And then finally, this use case is you want to invest in platforms and capabilities where not only you're driving the latest and greatest, but you're not constantly in this chase of building yet another app, yet another applications, and so forth. If you do this right, it's about having the right SDKs in place to also modernize your workhorses across the enterprise. And in our case, the Flare is our quality tool that we use with a lot of our partners, vendors, technicians in the field, to where which you would keep score of, how was this fiber job done, right? What was the rating and so forth, and what was the comments? And generally, in any quality systems, you have a score and then you have comments from the reviewer. In this case, we didn't change this tool. We didn't build yet another tool just because AI came along. What we found that through this SDK, we could bring those Gen AI capabilities to be able to analyze thousands and hundreds of thousands of comments from our engineers in the field, derive the right insights so we can provide the right feedback to the techs and to our vendors in the field to improve the overall experience. So that's kind of been our journey in network, building our digital twin, that it's not just data, it's data, logic, and actions to improve the resiliency of our network as well as the customer experience. I'll turn it over to Mykola next to talk about what's coming in the future.
So thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I know that we have a few minutes left, and I would like to spend them on maybe a few trends, right? Like on some of the areas that we see other customers looking into it, spending time, energy, and money on this, right? So obviously you have heard a lot about a lot of these things, right? So anything from the large action models, small language models, really taking that capabilities from generalized intelligence that's brought by generative AI to more enterprise-specific intelligence, right? And more than others, perhaps to a certain extent, these multi-agent systems, right? That's what's happening quite a bit right now. Everybody's looking into it. Even the RAGs, or retrieval augmented generation type of approaches that a lot of you and us as a whole, as an industry use, often these days are agentic types of systems, right? And agent-driven. So wanted to focus on that a little bit and talk to you about some of the advantages, some of the considerations, and maybe some of the things to keep in mind, right? This is really truly meant to complement something that was mentioned earlier, right? Because everybody expects, value and ROI from anything you do, right? So if you invest $1 into it, can you get $10 back? I mean, it's as simple as that. So with generative models and specifically with agent-based systems, that is something to keep in mind, right? You have to have the right approach, the right strategy to build, develop, deploy, and maintain these models. I'm not going to tell you a lot about or spend any time on what the agent is, yes, but there are some of these key components, right? You have the core, you have the planning, it can use the tools and so on. But oftentimes when we are being asked like, okay, so why does this matter, right? Why do we all talk about the agents, right? It's a busy slide, but the message here is this, that when you are, in the past, let's say, when you look at the classical AI systems, you quite often were asked, it's almost as if you're asked to write an essay without being able to use a backspace or delete button, right? You have to keep writing your answer no matter what till the end. With agent-based systems, you have a reflection, you can go back, you can iterate. You don't have a linear process anymore. You have these almost different ways of reasoning, right? If you think about networking, or if you're thinking about any sort of consolidation or migration, right? Mapping out the processes that are quite often in the minds of your employees and that are not always on paper. This can help with that, right? You could use agents almost to map out the processes within your organization that can allow you to optimize, that can allow you to consolidate, maybe even migrate, right? If you kind of taking different portfolio of products, technology solutions, that could be very useful with this, right? Now, everybody talks about the advantages, right? But there are things to keep in mind. We are very pragmatic about it, right? So I think, as you could see, certainly like, privacy and security, making sure that you have the right control and governance of these agents, making sure that you have the proper task transmission and that these agents don't destabilize, right? Another area that I'll mention that is very practical is this. Agent systems, they tend to be relatively verbose, right? They talk a lot to each other. What does that mean? That means when you train and when you build your solutions, you are very likely to be using more tokens, there are more API calls. That can be a bit expensive. So you have to have the right approach or strategy in order to deploy these systems smartly, right? So you do the training, and maybe during the training, you spend a little bit more, that costs you a little bit more. But then when you deploy, there are approaches and opportunities. Think of it almost as like Gen AI FinOps. You know how you have the FinOps for the cloud utilization, for the data, and so on. The same ideas apply here. Can we take a workload that would typically run, let's say, and cost you $1, and make sure that it costs a lot less, right? So there are different strategies to this. But the way that I like to say it is that there are no bad news. There's only good news with a challenge. All of these things are addressable and one can overcome. I know that we have only a couple of minutes left, so I do want to pause here and see if, from the agent, kind of standpoint, or from the, some of these trend standpoints, what do you see, happening within your organization of that,
I mean, we see the agents as the interns of the future, having the unlimited interns of the future, right? And many people kind of have seen this as kind of a threat. Hey, these virtual agents are coming, will they replace jobs and so forth? But the way we see it as, hey, these are your future interns. These are kind of your helpers to help you do what you do best, right? And use it in that way. The key, I guess, from a risk and fear perspective is being able to have the right systems in place, or what I kind of refer to as ontology, having that enterprise logic and documented, in a unified place, that it's, because things will evolve. So you want to have in place a system that crowd knowledge continuously evolves and keeps up that enterprise knowledge, so that if you want to pause this system of these agents and you can control them or make changes as kind of the business changes, you have those controls in place.
So you also brought up an interesting point. What I've seen in a lot of organizations is that also the acceptance, right? So certainly the agents and Gen AI will have impact on the human capital one way or another, right? But also the final product that's produced by these systems, right? Can that be accepted if it's only produced by AI? Or does it have to be, let's say, finalization by a human still, right? Because if there has to be a finalization by a human, right, then and only that can lead to acceptance, then in essence, you are building all of the assistants and kind of, the co-pilots and,
Right.
and so on.
I mean, at the end of the day, the initiative that we did inside of AT&T, this network simplification and transformation, where we looked at processes and tools to kind of, we started with, because isn't these agents, at the end of the day, they're being built to make humans' lives better, like simplify what we do every day. We didn't start with, let's go develop something or what we think is going to add value. We use design thinking up front. And I know it's hard if you have a culture of engineering and developers, you just want to go solve the problem. But it's important, even with AI, to just slow down, stop, get people that think differently, designers and user experience researchers, understand what's the need, what's the value proposition, and then go build these agents in a way that, when you're done with your journey, you'll have that acceptance because you took the time to understand what people need. All right. We appreciate the time, and
All right.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.